Hi, everybody. It's Thursday night, time for our Bible study. And changes are taking place here at the church. I don't know if you can tell by the angle of the camera right now or not, but sanctuary is pretty well empty, not just of people, but of furnishings as well. The fellowship hall has some new flooring in the kitchen and the hallway and ready for carpet in the rest of it. And we're getting ready to put carpet in the sanctuary. So trying to take advantage of the time that we're not able to have services and do some work on the building itself that's been needed to be done. And that way we won't have to disrupt things once we get started back up again. Uh, our plan is to have it all done by Mother's Day. And our hope is that we'll be back in church and back in services on Mother's Day in one way or another. I hope to be with y'all on Mother's Day. Just some thoughts that's been going through my mind this week from the book of James, chapter 5, verse 17. It's talking about Elijah. It said, Elijah was a man subject to like passions as we are. And he prayed earnestly that it might not rain, and it rained not on the earth by the space of 3 years and 6 months. And he prayed again, and the heaven gave rain, and the earth brought forth her fruit. And most of the time when people talk about this passage of Scripture, they talk about the aspect of prayer. And don't get me wrong, that's important. That's a good thing, because the verse right before that tells us it's the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man that avails much. But the thing that's been on my mind this week, and the thing that stood out to me in this passage of Scripture, is that Elijah was a man, subject to like passion such as we are. I heard somebody say one time, and it's a good point. Have you ever heard somebody dealing with their pet or their dog or their cat or something, and it does something in an intelligent way, and they say it's almost human, and they mean that as a compliment? But did you ever notice people will use that as an excuse? I mean, if we come up short in something, or we're not up to the expectations of the boss or the supervisor at work, and our excuse is, well, I'm only human. But Elijah was just a man. He was a man. It says subject to like passions as we are. And I just want to show you tonight, I've just been thinking this week about some people in the Bible that we look to as heroes, and certainly Elijah is one of those. But I wanted to look at the fact that they were all just men. I thought about Moses. Moses, that great leader of the children of Israel that led the children of Israel out of Egypt and through the wilderness to the borders of the promised land. And we know the miracles that God did through the hands of Moses. But if you look at the history of Moses, Moses started out by failing. He started out thinking that he was going to accomplish God's will. He killed a man, buried him in the sand, and ended up running for his life, spent 40 years feeling like a failure on the backside of the desert, and yet God used him because he was just a man. Thought about David. There's a good example. I mean, we know that David is a man after God's own heart, but I'm glad the Bible doesn't just present David as the shepherd boy that goes out and kills Goliath, or as the man that wrote all the Psalms, or the man after God's own heart, but it also shows us his human side. It shows us his failures. It shows us his moral failures. It shows us how he lied and deceived to try to cover up his mistakes. It showed us how he even orchestrated the murder of a man. He was a man. He had his shortcomings. He had his failures. There's Elijah, and we'll talk about Elijah a little bit in a minute. But when you get into the New Testament, there's the example of Peter. I mean, I'm glad the Bible doesn't just show us Peter in the book of Acts preaching to 2,000 on the day of Pentecost, or having people that are sick brought out so that just his shadow passing by can bring them healing. But it also shows us his failures when he denied Christ and denied him 3 times on that night when Jesus was arrested. Thought about James and John, a couple more of Jesus' disciples. In fact, John was, if Jesus had a best friend on this earth, John was Jesus' best friend. And yet we see them not only as those great disciples, as men of faith, but there's an account where they're bickering with one another, and they even get their mother involved, trying to get the best seats next to Jesus, wanting to make sure they had the best positions when he started his kingdom. We see their human side as well. I thought about Thomas. Thomas, history tells us, was a great evangelist, a great missionary in the early church. But the thing that he is known best for was his human side. He doubted that the Lord had resurrected. He doubted that the message that he was getting was true. Even the Apostle Paul, who we know in the book of Acts, that great missionary establishing churches, wrote so many letters in the New Testament that give us the principles and the guidelines of the New Testament of grace and of faith that we live by today. And yet you find Paul at his time in Corinth, where God had to give him a special message to let him know that there were still people that hadn't bowed their knees to the idols, that hadn't given in to idolatry. He needed that encouragement from the Lord. He was only a man. And then I thought about Elijah. Elijah, that great man of faith, that great prophet in the Old Testament, the one who worked so many miracles and God used so mightily. And yet you find Elijah at one point sitting down under a tree and complaining to God, why don't you just kill me? If I've done all of this and this is the way it's going to be, why don't you just kill me? At another time you find him in a cave and God had to send an earthquake and send a fire and all of that to get his attention, and then God spoke to him in a still small voice. Elijah was just a man. And I say all of this not to excuse any of their behaviors. I don't think it was right for Moses to do what he did. I certainly don't think it was right for David to do what he did. I'm not excusing Peter for denying the Lord, or James and John for their quibbling and their bickering about who should have the greatest seat in the kingdom. I'm not excusing any of that. I'm not saying that because we're human we have the right to fail, but I'm saying because we are human, we are going to fail from time to time. And I know how the enemy works, and I know how he likes to, in those moments of failure, those moments of shortcoming. The Bible says we all have them. We've all sinned and come short. We've all fallen short of the standards that God has set for us. And I know how he likes to work in those times, how he likes to heap the condemnation on and say, you know, you shouldn't have done that. You know you failed. You know you've fallen short. You're worthless. You're no good for anything. God can't use you. You might as well just give up, throw in the towel, walk away, because you're never going to amount to anything for God. I know he works that way because he's told me those things before. And yet I look in the Bible and I find so many people, and I think that's why God put them in there. They were men. They were human. They had their failures. But he prayed and it didn't rain. And he prayed again and it rained. God used him over and over again. What happened in each of those cases was, again, not making excuses for their behavior, but every one of them had a moment where they came to God. They dealt with their failures. They dealt with their shortcomings. God restored them and continued to use them. And I just want to encourage you tonight, if you're in one of those places right now where the enemy is trying to load guilt and load condemnation upon you and tell you might as well give up, you're only human. Do what Moses did. Do what David did. Do what Peter did. Do what James and John did. Do what Thomas did. Go to the Lord, have that moment with the Lord, deal with those things, and understand that God still wants to use you in spite of the fact that you're human. God still wants to use us. I just want to encourage you with that tonight. Pray that God blesses you. I hope that you're all doing well, and I hope we see you again in church very soon. God bless you tonight, and thanks for listening.